Despite summits between North Korea's Kim Jong-un and the United States' President Trump, tensions on the Korean peninsula remain markedly high. During his meetings with President Trump, Kim Jong-un promised to stop, or at least heavily curtail, his nation's nuclear program. And yet, American intelligence agencies have extensive intelligence showing that not only is activity at North Korea's secret nuclear labs not halting, they are in fact still fully operational. The reason why is simple. North Korea needs nuclear weapons if it's to survive as an independent power, and Kim Jong-un needs nuclear weapons if he's to personally remain in power. Not just a nation's future, but its leader's future is wrapped up in the successful development of nuclear weapons, and thus no intelligence official in the world believes that North Korea will ever halt its nuclear ambitions unless forced to by military action. Yet despite an increasingly sophisticated nuclear weapons program, the US has been hesitant to use military force against the Hermit Kingdom for fear of sparking a full-blown war on the Korean peninsula. The stakes for inaction, however, are about as high as taking action, with a nuclear North Korea completely destabilizing the security environment of Asia's eastern shores. Japan, long a target of North Korea's ire, has already taken the incredible steps of discarding large parts of its traditionalist pacifist military doctrine and authorized the use of expeditionary forces to support American operations in Asia. This means that for the first time since World War II, Japan is officially sanctioning the use of military force preemptively against foreign powers. Were North Korea to become nuclear armed, it's likely that Japan, Asia's rising military power, would very quickly become even more aggressive, if not preemptively launch a war against North Korea that would force the US to follow suit. While Japan is protected under the US's nuclear umbrella, it would have no reason to develop nuclear weapons of its own. But the Japanese view a nuclear-armed North Korea as completely unacceptable and will stop at nothing to prevent this from happening. For decades, the United States prepared for war with North Korea alongside its South Korean allies, and for nearly that entire time, operational planning changed little in how that war would be executed. A new war between the Koreas would play out much in the same way as the last war, with large formations of ground units maneuvering against hordes of North Korean troops. The war would, in essence, be fully conventional in every sense of the word, and aside from vastly improved technology on the US and South Korean side, there would be little difference in execution from the way the last war was fought in the late 1940s, early 1950s. In the last few years, though, the United States and South Korea have rethought their strategy for defeating the North in a war. A new operational plan, known as OPLAN 5015, has replaced the old wartime plan, OPLAN 5027, and differs sharply in scope and strategy. While many details of the new plan to crush North Korea remain secret, there are many parts of it which have become public knowledge, and other parts that can be guessed at given the state of the US military doctrine and the types of troops and equipment being deployed in the Korean peninsula. OPLAN 5015 has been largely shaped by greatly improved intelligence gathering inside the Hermit Kingdom itself, as well as new technological developments by the US and new political developments within the country itself. High-ranking North Korean defectors have given the US and South Korea a better insight into the inner power and political circles of North Korean politics, and revealed a nation that is completely under centralized control and under the Kim family's thumb, in a way that makes its military command and control uniquely vulnerable to disruption. If Kim Jong-un were to be quickly removed from power, unclear lines of secession and a total lack of independent authority from local commanders means that the North Korean military would be completely paralyzed and unable to operate effectively. Much like Soviet military units during the Cold War, military commanders on the ground must always gain the approval of their superiors before taking any action. The results of this type of extreme and suffocating top-down command structure were on full display during the first Gulf War in the 1990s, when American and Allied troops completely dismantled Iraq's formidable armies by taking apart its communication systems. Without the ability to contact their superiors, local battlefield commanders were all but paralyzed in their decision-making process, while NATO forces enjoyed a large degree of autonomy and independence that allowed them to be a reactive and flexible force. A big part of OPLAN 5015 thus revolves around the destruction of North Korea's communication systems, which in this case means targeting broadcast facilities and telephone networks either with special forces, kinetic strikes, or electronic warfare. The disruption in communications would leave North Korea's highly rigid and inflexible commanders paralyzed, allowing US and South Korean forces to outmaneuver and destroy them. Yet, while this was always part of the US's plans on fighting North Korea, where OPLAN 5015 differs is that for the first time it hints at waging a very selective war rather than the total war scenario outlined in previous war plans. Previously, US and South Korean forces were expected to initially fight a retreating action against North Korea's overwhelming superiority in numbers. While its military equipment is largely dated, North Korea retains a huge amount of combat troops and the vehicles to quickly move them from the north into the south. And on the ground, North Korea features a massive concentration of tens of thousands of artillery batteries, which can completely overwhelm the American and South Korean forces along the border. Yet, intelligence has shown that North Korea lacks the resources to continue an offensive deep into South Korea and would completely stall out in a matter of weeks. Thus, old war plans called for a defense-in-depth action against North Korea's initial attacks, with US ROK forces falling back along predetermined defensive positions and bleeding DPRK forces as they did so. Once the US air power had transitioned into the Pacific theater in force within a day or two, DPRK forces would be subjected to a bombing campaign for the history books and absolutely savaged from the air. Then US ROK forces would begin to push back into North Korea to ultimately take Pyongyang. The new war plan calls for the US and South Korea to resist the initial attack as before, only now instead of launching a full military campaign into North Korea, the plan instead calls for a surgical war against select military targets. In the opening stages of the war, an electronic warfare campaign against the North's forces would target their radar and communication systems, blinding and confusing commanders on the ground. Simultaneously, US B-2 stealth bombers would deliver ground penetration munitions against North Korea's nuclear sites, while a special strike force would immediately launch an attack against North Korean government facilities. American and South Korean special forces would penetrate deep into North Korea, likely using the same stealth Black Hawk helicopter design briefly seen during the raid against bin Laden's compound in Pakistan, though they might also be inserted via extremely high altitude or halo jumps. The goal of these specialized kill teams would be simple: the elimination of Kim Jong-un and his senior military leadership, and this is an operation that the US and South Korea have trained for extensively. By eliminating Kim Jong-un and any immediate successors, the North Korean government would be thrown into disarray. Completely centralized control may have allowed the Kim family to rule North Korea with an iron grip, but it has also created a terrible vulnerability, which the US and its South Korean allies would very quickly exploit in the case of a war. As the testimony of high-ranking North Korean defectors has shown, the internal political situation within North Korea is extremely unstable and relies on the continued rule of Kim Jong-un. This is a fact further attested to by the spree of murders undertaken by Kim Jong-un upon his rise to power, as he consolidated his right to rule by the elimination of discovered and imagined political rivals who were suspected of wanting to seize power for himself. Some of those killed were even members of the Kim family itself. Without central control and with a systemic and overwhelming bombing campaign carried out by the US and South Korea, already low morale in North Korean troops would begin deserting en masse. It's believed that despite the heavy indoctrination undergone by North Korean soldiers, the average soldier would be extremely vulnerable to psychological warfare operations undertaken after the elimination of North Korea's command structure, and further helped by the intense bombardment and overwhelming firepower deployed by American and South Korean air and naval forces. OPLAN 5015 differs wildly from its predecessors by instead calling for a limited war that exploits the use of sophisticated new smart weapon systems, intelligence gathered from years of reconnaissance of the North, and the inherent political instabilities built into the North Korean command and control system. While still fully prepared to fight a conventional total war scenario, the US and South Korea hope to limit the scale and cost of the war for both sides by instead relying on a series of very rapid and precise surgical strikes. This has the added benefit of curtailing a possible Chinese response, as a full-scale military invasion of the North may once more prompt China to dispatch large numbers of troops into the peninsula. While China lacks the military capabilities to win a war against the US, it could make a ground war in the Korean peninsula a very costly affair for America. Do you think the new war plan against North Korea would be more or less effective in the case of war? Why or why not? Let us know in the comments, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more great content.